Hey guys, and welcome back to the Curious Curators. I'm Hope.
And I'm Lindsay.
And today we are going to talk about something that we probably could have talked about in October, but we didn't. That's witchcraft and witch hunts and witch trials and some Tennessee witches.
Yeah, it's always time for witchery.
It really is. And we were all black for aesthetic.
It also helps that today is rainy and gray, and usually the natural light kind of gives us our lovely glow that we've had these past couple of episodes.
Yeah, not today though.
Not today. Now we are grayish and dull, which
Yes.
I think fits, but you can't see like our lovely outfits as well.
Yeah, well, yours is much better than mine, so.
Well, and my lipstick is green, not black, but can't really tell.
Mine is definitely not, but that's okay. So this is something that we just talk about sometimes. We just kind of chat about.
We like dark topics in
do.
general. True crime, paranormal, supernatural, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so we thought this might be a good one. And honestly, it's really interesting. And also, Salem, Massachusetts is usually a huge tourist attraction.
Oh, yeah.
And this year, they kind of didn't have that. And they did a lot of really cool online stuff, though. We could kind of tour the town online and everything.
Oh.
So I think this is fitting. Let's bring a little bit of tourist traffic to the Salem, Massachusetts website.
All right. Well, we're doing good here.
We are. Sponsorships.
Sponsor us. Somebody sponsor us.
Also, we could go sit in your town and make this podcast just as easily.
That's true.
So,
want to fly us out to Salem?
or anywhere that's a little bit witchy, I think. I just thought of another kind of witch I could talk about that I'll throw in near the end. All right, well, I guess we can go ahead and get started because we have unnaturally long intros.
That's true. We do. And if you don't like it, you probably have stopped listening to us by now.
But, we'll just go ahead and jump right in there. So, witchcraft is very old.
Yeah, so I actually found, I think the oldest example was from 2000 BCE.
Oh, okay.
And it's from the Code of Hammurabi.
Oh, all right.
And it says, if a man has put a spell upon another man, and it is not justified, keyword, he upon whom the spell is laid shall go to the holy river. Into the holy river shall he plunge.
Okay.
If the holy river overcome him, and he is drowned, the man who put the spell upon him shall take possession of his house. If the holy river declares him innocent, and he remains unharmed, the man who laid the spell shall be put to death. That he plunged into the river shall take possession of he that plunged into the river shall take possession of the house of him who laid the spell upon him.
So, what was the statistics of swimming back then?
I don't know, but I think it just might be a good idea to know how to swim. It's kind of that shows up later in witchcraft too, like in witch trials. If you drown in the river, you were innocent, but if you float, you're a witch and you'll be put to death.
Which is a bit dramatic, seeing as how I think learning how to swim, especially if you live somewhere with a lot of water, is a prudent thing.
Right, but I mean, if you're accused of witchcraft, you kind of have to choose whether you want to drown or be burned at the stake or hanged or
stoned,
pressed.
Yeah, I'd probably just drown in the river at the end of the day. But also, I think you would probably be scared to death. You know how you just get in panic? I would assume that would happen as well. It's probably be harder to swim. Clearly, this is not something we've ever experienced. I did some looking.
Someday, I hope to achieve that level where people accuse me of being a witch.
Well, I did some looking for older kind of witchcraft type things as well. Medea from Greek mythology, she was a sorceress, and she was a priestess of the goddess Hecate. I'm not exactly sure how to say her name, but she was the goddess of magic and witchcraft and knowledge of herbs and poison and things like that. So also ghosts and necromancy, which is a little
I dig it.
Yeah, I've seen some really cool, this is probably going to age me, I saw some really cool mood boards on Tumblr and stuff of her, and it was just visually stunning, of
Pinterest.
course. Yeah.
We are so millennial.
I know. We really are. But so I guess that just kind of shows just how far back it went. The Code of Hammurabi is very old.
Yes, that's one of the first. Yeah, Hammurabi is one of the first. I think it's the first code of law ever written by a civilization that we have evidence of.
Yeah, and it wasn't it on the big cuneiform, is that how you say that word?
Cuneiform,
Tablets
yeah.
and everything.
I think so.
Yeah.
This was way back in like Sumeria.
Yes, they probably have pictures
Mesopotamia.
of it, but we personally do not have photos of that right now. But I think it also shows witchcraft varies kind of culturally, I think.
I think there are a lot of different cultures that actually have gods of sorcery and witchcraft. Like the Aztecs also had a goddess of scorpions and sorcery,
okay.
Xochitl.
Show off.
So you do have a lot of these gods that are patrons of witchcraft in just about every culture. And I think you have sorcery and witchcraft in just about every known culture.
I remember in grad school I took this ancient like civilizations type class, and we all had to get up and give a presentation, and one of the girls did curse tablets.
Oh.
And they went from like the ancient world to like more modern, like in Bath, like you would like write it or whatever the form was, and you could tie it up with something, and sometimes they would put like voodoo-esque dolls and then just like throw it in a specific place that would just be full of them. And I think that's kind of interesting, like curse tablets.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, even today in places like West Africa, they have witchcraft marketplaces, essentially, where you can get all your needs to create witchcraft. You can also find witchcraft supplies on Etsy.
Yeah.
Well, it's still around.
I know, like in Louisiana, voodoo is
of
like
course.
a magic, and there's this one place on Bourbon Street, and it is like a Marie Laveau type place, and you can buy different things, but also when you go in, it's polite to leave an offering.
Okay.
So you leave like a quarter or whatever. And I know that when you could go into St. Louis Cemetery, which now you have to go on a tour for safety of the cemetery reasons, but you would, the grave that she is said to be buried in, people would draw 3 X's, knock 3 times, because it's a mausoleum, spin around 3 times, and then leave an offering. So you would see in the cemetery graves that were covered in X's, and people would leave like coins and cigarettes and all kinds of things as an offering, and they were supposed to grant your wishes.
Oh.
Which I just remember. That's what I was like, oh, I just remembered that. I don't know what it's like now. I haven't been in a couple years, but it was really interesting to see that, because it wasn't just the one grave. There were quite a few that were like that. So.
Something that I found that was a commonality with witchcraft all throughout history and all over the world was that it was basically used to justify the maltreatment of women.
Oh, definitely.
I'm talking Europe and Africa, the Middle East, Asia. I mean, everywhere.
The Americas.
Yeah, the Americas. It was almost always women who were basically the victims of accusations of witchcraft, and it was kind of a way to keep women in line.
Because all you really needed was one accusation.
Yeah.
And you would go to like trial. But I mean, really, like, we know those trials were a sham at this point.
And even today, there are examples in India, Saudi Arabia. I think somebody was executed for witchcraft in, like, 2014.
Oh, so that's very recent.
Nepal, Central Africa. In Ghana, it's so bad that they actually have 6 different places that are called witch camps. And they're basically for refugee women who were accused of witchcraft to hide in safety. And there are about 1,000 women
that's so sad.
across the 6 camps, and they're basically just trying to hide, like, they're fugitives from these accusations of witchcraft. And there are also, it's actually become somewhat of a, wherever capitalism goes, they can find a way to mistreat everyone, because
that's very true.
In places like Malawi, they use indigenous healers and Christian healers make a living on exorcising children.
Oh, lovely.
Not adults,
but
children accused of witchcraft. And in Nigeria, accused child witches are starved, beaten, mutilated, set on fire, forced to consume acid or cement, and buried alive by Christian churches.
It's a very Christ-like thing to do.
Yeah, and these are done as a way to show that they are the they are better than all these other churches because in Nigeria there's a lot of competition for congregations.
Okay.
And so the more that they have this legitimacy fighting
witches.
child witches.
I did see that. I didn't write down the specific verses or anything, but in the Old Testament there are laws against witchcraft in the Bible. So I assume that is what they use in order to.
I think they have some in the New Testament as well. And the funny thing is that it was in the King James Version of the Bible where they translated it as witches, which will be interesting as we move forward talking about witch hunts, because King James was pivotal in witch hunts. Translating the original text, actually it wasn't even the original text, but
translation of a translation.
Yes, translating the Hebrew, which was a translation of the original text, the word has kind of lost its meaning over time, but the King James Version of the Bible chooses to translate it as witchcraft. Newer versions of the Bible today usually translate it as sorcery, but it could mean a number of different things.
And I think that happens a lot with translations, not just of the Bible, but of translations of almost anything. Like we could say of the Iliad that I was reading.
Right, because we were just talking about that at our last podcast.
Translating from a language that is not even spoken by anyone anymore except for scholars, and their knowledge has been passed down for so long that language is not the same as it would have been when it was written.
Well, we were talking about the translation of love.
Yeah, like there's what?
The philos could mean many different types of love.
So, and we'll never know what that person was
Which
thinking.
type of love they intended when they wrote it.
And I think a lot of times, and I'm definitely not trying to be rude about translators, because I think that must be one of the hardest jobs out there.
Absolutely.
Especially to translate from an essentially lost language. But sometimes you do have to make an educated guess.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. That's not even being harsh on translators. You have to make an educated guess, and that's why there are so many different translations of the Bible or the Quran or all of these ancient texts.
Yeah, and that's why some texts can't be translated at this point. Like even today, like they still can't be done.
Yeah.
And that's so interesting to me. I couldn't imagine the dedication that must take. So you do have to take those translations, I think, with a grain of salt. So
yeah, because words can mean many different things when translated to something else.
And you have to think, some of these, there's chunks missing.
Yeah.
So, like, because paper, papyrus, none of that lasts forever. So is it the Dead Sea Scrolls that have, like, literal chunks of them missing?
Yeah.
And you're just guessing.
And that's a lot of text. And think about if you were translating from English, a couple thousand years from now, and you were trying to translate the word like.
Yeah.
Even today, amongst ourselves, it's like, well, she liked him. Well, did she like him? Then it becomes a context thing.
And it's also just like is the way to start a word. It's the way to start a sentence sometimes. I know I do that. You could call it like Valley Girl if you will, but I say like every other word. And it always means like,
it's
an
just
exclamation, a conjunction, whatever you
It's a filler word.
It really is.
But then you also have it in the context of it's also a verb.
Yeah.
But the verb could have many different connotations. So, you're looking at these old works and you're like, did they really mean witchcraft in particular? Or, as we're going to learn about King James, was there actually a goal behind that?
Yeah, and I mean, that's also a thing. Like, when anything that's, like, I think written or translated or whatever by the state, there is usually a goal in mind.
An ulterior motive.
That could, you could even say translating from Old English to Modern English is the same thing. There's always some sort of goal, because history is written by the people in power at the time.
Yeah.
So there could have never, ever, ever been any witch trials before King James decided, let's just go on it. This is what this ancient text says. So let's just, But, well.
So do you want to start talking about witch hunts and witch trials?
Sure. Sure, let's talk about that now.
And I think for the most part we're talking about, at least my research is mostly Central Europe and Western Europe, and then moving into the Americas.
Yes. I think, like, It's so much easier to talk about that just because like, we have experience there in a way. Like we that's kind of what we study.
Well, and there's a record of it.
Yeah, a well-kept record, honestly.
And there are, of course, other places where this happens where it's interesting because if you go to certain areas in the Pacific Islands and things like that, it's, Papua New Guinea, even the Philippines, there are good witches and bad witches.
Right, like the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, so if you're afflicted with something, you go seek out a good witch to fix the bad witches, what the bad witch is doing. So they didn't really necessarily, they would have witch hunts where they go hunt down the bad witch, but it wasn't such a well-known epidemic that this turned into.
Well, because I think one thing we can go ahead and just kind of start this with is witchcraft can be used as an explainer, right? It can.
Yes.
Did your crops die? It must have been witches.
It was a witch.
Your cows? It was witches.
It was a witch.
Like, a lot of people, a plague comes through.
A witch.
Yeah, like anything. You are just a superbly unlucky person. Like me, I'm always hurt. It must be.
Oh yeah, your ankle. It was a witch.
It must be. Like I'm always hurt or sick or something. So like that. If this was 500 years ago.
What's going on in the world now? A witch.
It's exactly like everything that happened was a witch. So, I mean, if you think like that, of course there were witch hunts.
Right. It was a way to explain the unexplainable.
Yeah, and just bad luck wasn't really an option. You don't just come across bad luck. Like a witch gives you bad luck.
Well, and I don't think that there was no concept of bad luck, but bad luck was inflicted upon you by someone because you're looking for someone to blame.
Right. I would forever be blaming witches if that was me. But I did kind of see that from like the 14 to 1500s was like a major time in Europe for witch hunts, and it came to the United States later.
Yeah, so the most like well-known witch hunt was from 1589 until the late 17th century, but where I found that it really started to take off was about 1484, when Pope Innocent VIII acknowledged the existence of witches. So this was significant, apparently, with a papal bull, which is kind of a proclamation.
Is this the same time that wasn't real according to the phantom time hypothesis?
Oh God, here we go.
If that's the case, then,
So this, the only record we have of this is another book that was written 2 years later that said the Pope said this, but here's what the Pope apparently said. In 1484, many persons of both sexes, unmindful of their own salvation and straying from the Catholic faith, have abandoned themselves to devils, incubi, and succubi, and by their incantation spells and conjurations and other accursed charms and crafts, enormities and horrid offenses. And this was the first time that apparently the Catholic Church had acknowledged the existence of witches. And
but we don't have,
somebody said that they said this.
So I think this could be a whole episode in and of itself, but the Vatican archives are, you can't just go there.
No.
So we have no idea of what's in those archives. So that bull could be real, could be in those archives somewhere. I'm sure they saved them. Or it could be that someone just made it up and wrote a book and was like, I'm just going to start trouble today.
Yeah.
And Pope Innocent was like, I'm just not going to bother confirming or denying.
Yeah.
Because popes are quite busy men.
So 2 years later, this appeared in a book called the Malleus Maleficarum, which is the Hammer of Witches.
Okay.
And it had basically inspired the author, Heinrich Kramer, to accuse women. One in particular towards which he had a personal animosity towards, of witchcraft.
Oh, so it was a legitimate accusation is what you're saying.
Oh, yeah. She rejected him, and so he accused her of witchcraft.
Nobody take that as like a thing that you should ever do, by the way. Like
just can't relate.
That's what I'm going to start saying when people hit on me in bars or something. I'm going to be like, is this witchcraft?
And when the women were acquitted because they weren't witches, his revenge was writing this book.
Oh, stand-up man.
Yes, very, very unrelatable. I can't imagine a man doing something like that these days. He gets rejected.
And writes a book.
And,
he would take to Twitter, but...
Right.
But
and takes to a public platform to basically defame these women.
Wow, I'm so glad things like that don't happen anymore. That would be astounding.
Yeah, because he wrote, the book talked about how to identify witches, the danger they pose to society, and how to hunt them.
How to hunt them. So, are we suggesting that witches are not like very old women with warts and like bad teeth and like knobby fingers like Hansel and Gretel's witch? Are we suggesting that they might just be normal people who someone has a grudge against?
Or who somebody just thinks is weird or different.
Too pretty?
Like, too pretty. Yeah, that would be witchcraft.
Yeah. I mean, just like anything really. So,
Sometimes in history, being a redhead was considered being a sign of a witch, or having curly hair was a sign you were evil. All kinds of stuff. Just about anything. If you exist as a person at some point in history, there's probably something about you that could have been accused of being a witch.
You would have fit the profile, like...
If you own a cat, that was one of the later evidences of being a witch, or have a mole or a birthmark or anything, because that was a witch's mark, or the devil's mark.
Yeah.
So you have a weird freckle, you have a mole, you have a birthmark, you have a cat. You're probably a witch.
Yeah. It's rough.
A skin tag.
We're surrounded.
It's called a devil's nipple.
What are we going to do? We're surrounded.
I'm definitely a witch.
Same.
I definitely have moles and freckles.
I have freckles and my hair is quite red, like in the sun. You can't, clearly it's like very dark here, but in the sun it's quite red.
I have 2 cats, so I'm like a double witch.
Oh, I should probably leave. I'm a little bit scared. But
we're also unmarried.
Oh yeah,
we're approaching 30.
We're
so
old. Yeah, we're old maids that are going to be living in the forest.
We're spinsters, and if you're a spinster, thou art a witch.
Yep. Because you're married to the devil.
We're also educated, so thou art a witch.
This is a struggle. I'm starting to be a little bit scared of myself. I should probably...
Now I'm just trying to find how I'm not a witch, basically.
I'm drawing a blank, sorry. So, the Spanish Inquisition, that dealt with witchcraft.
Oh, God! No one ever expects the Spanish Inquisition. I didn't expect you to bring it up, so I did not expect the Spanish Inquisition.
I'm more so asking, I didn't look at them a lot. I didn't read into them a lot because basically, like anything that you did in that time, they were out to get you. But, like the Inquisition could deal with things like witches, one would assume, especially as it was all over Europe, basically.
Yes.
And run by the Pope.
Anything that might have been a threat to the Catholic faith. And basically anything was heresy.
And England and Scotland and Ireland and such also had witches, just, were they No, they were Catholic at this point, never mind. Early 1400s, they were Catholic.
Yeah, one of the kind of where witchcraft, these witch hunts really started in Central Europe. I'm talking Germany, kind of where the Malleus Maleficarum.
Right.
It mostly happened in Central Europe, but it really came to the British Isles with King James VI of Scotland. He was not super interested to begin with, but he made a journey to Denmark to marry Anne of Denmark.
Of course he did.
Unfortunately, vicious storms prevented... he didn't go over the first time. He awaited her to arrive.
Of course he did.
Storms prevented her from coming to Scotland. So he instead went to Europe, went to Denmark to get her. But witch hunting was a big deal then. And in Denmark, King Christian IV and his predecessor actually burned witches by the hundreds. And in Denmark, witches took responsibility for making King James and Anne's journey across the sea difficult. So all of a sudden, James was exposed to this realm of
possibility
for dealing with people he didn't like. And so he actually really started the witch hunts of the British Isles, which heavily influenced the witch hunts of America as well.
Okay.
I think the first one that happened were the North Berwick Witch Trials. In 1590, David Seaton, a deputy bailiff in Scotland, believed his housemaid was a witch. And according to him, she had suddenly gained healing powers and would sneak out at night. And of course, he thought, wow, she's a witch.
Because it couldn't have been another reason.
Yeah, exactly. So Gillis Duquesne was her, or maybe Gillis Duncan. It has an E on the end, but you know those old English spellings. She was tortured by her master with thumb screws and wrenching.
He sounds like a really great guy to work for.
Yeah. And she wouldn't confess to witchcraft, but then he searched her body for a devil's mark, which could be any skin blemish, like we talked about. And he found one.
Of course he did.
Basically, the belief in what you probably picked up on was that Duncan was having an affair with somebody.
Right.
And
he didn't want his house to not be upstanding.
well, it was more of a...
Or he liked her.
Yeah.
Upstanding guy. I will say the modern day Scots are much greater people than these that we're talking about now.
So she was having an affair. What they believe was this devil's mark they found on her was a hickey, which is why she admitted to being a witch so that they wouldn't find out she was having an affair.
Yeah, I'd much rather be called a witch.
And she confessed to working with the devil and all of this, and she was the first Scottish witch to do so. But it was believed that he was motivated by he wanted her. This is... That's what happened when the Malleus Maleficarum was written, too.
It's so strange. Like, I can't
This
believe...
it seems like a theme that keeps coming out.
It really does. It must be the witches trying to blame men.
That's true. That's usually how it goes. Women have had all the power in history and blame men for everything.
So in what year was this?
This was 1590.
Okay, so we're getting closer to witch trials in the Americas, which I think we've probably all heard of.
Yes, yeah. So in 1590, she actually gave up the name. Gillis Duncan gave up the name of her coven. She gave up 8 people in order to get away from punishment. And those 8 people gave up names. And over 100 women by this time were tortured into confessions.
Oh my gosh, Scotland wasn't that big. I mean, it's still not. Like, we got like half of Edinburgh on trial at this point.
that was basically like that whole community. And one of the women actually said she was responsible for the storms that had plagued James and Anne's crossing.
So hurtful.
And he believed that he actually believed she was a liar. Like, he didn't believe in witchcraft at that moment until apparently she repeated pillow talk between James and Anne back to him, like she had been spying on him magically.
That's awkward.
And then he became convinced that there was a conspiracy of witches out to get him. And 70 of 200 were convicted of witchcraft. So 70 of the 200 accused. And they were garroted and burned at the stake.
I have to wonder, like, what pillow talk was it that she repeated? Because if it was like, I love you.
I know.
Yes, you're absolutely right. She must be a witch.
I feel like it had to be very generic.
That's all I could think of.
Also, I was thinking about this, and this is just me speculating. Things like that were a lot more public then. Like,
Right.
so when Marie Antoinette, which admittedly was a little bit later,
Yeah.
when she was supposed to consummate her marriage with Louis XVI, people listened at the door to hear it happen. Like, it was a spectacle. It was a public thing.
And they would, like, walk you up to bed on your wedding night and all kinds of things. Like, it was very public. So chances are if she worked anywhere near that house or
knew somebody, or it could have been gossip.
Yeah.
Everyone. What else did you have to talk about in 1590?
But at the same time, like, I probably wouldn't remember a conversation that we had 3 days ago.
That's
like,
true.
Word for word, I could probably tell you, like, we talked about this. But if you just gave, like, very generic, like you said, like, this is what you're kind of talking about or something,
Yeah.
I'd probably be like, you're right.
Yeah, how'd you know that?
But
Thou art a witch!
But I'm like, I couldn't remember what I had for breakfast, much less like a conversation I had word for word.
Yeah.
Unless it like just really made me angry or something and I was like repeating it, but who knows? All right. I just blanked for a second, sorry. Yay. Well, let's see.
Would we like to move on to the Salem Witch Trials, and we can save some of these other cases for our extended podcast for our patrons?
Sure. Well, we all know that the Salem Witch Trials took place in Salem, Massachusetts. But that was actually not the first case of like witchery in the United States or in what would become the United States.
Do tell.
So I read that the first accusations of witchcraft in the colonies, I guess, were in 1645. A husband and wife accused each other. So
okay.
Like I strive to be that extra. Like if you were like you're a witch, I'd be like, no, she's a witch. She's lying. So I can only assume that's what happened. And then later in 1647, a woman called Margaret Jones was executed in the colonies. So this is about 45 years before the Salem Witch Trials, which happened in 1692.
Yeah.
And they were not in like it was like Salem town or something. Like it wasn't like a huge city at this point. I think Salem might be quite large now, but it was like quite small at the time. And like if you have ever read about the Salem Witch Trials, it was basically like some little girls that were
9 and 11
playing like the equivalent of Bloody Mary in the mirror.
Yeah.
And they got scared and they were like, there's
a witch!
Is a witch. And then I can only assume that if you start getting a lot of attention as a child by your entire town, like you can't be like, I lied. Could you imagine how much trouble you would have been in?
Yeah.
So they just kept this up, and the Salem Witch Trials were a spectacle. Like children throwing themselves on the floor, screaming that people were stabbing them with pens, like spirits, and just ridiculous.
And Tituba was really the easiest scapegoat to come up with because she was from Barbados. She was described as an Indian, so I'm assuming a native of Barbados.
Yes, I would assume that as well. And
in a Puritan colony.
Yeah, and then the other women who were accused were often like widows or very elderly, like people that it was easy to just throw under the bus. I'm pretty sure none of these girls ever accused anyone in their own families of witchcraft. I could be wrong, but I don't ever remember seeing that. It was very sad. Like I think it's very sad. So many people died just because little girls were.
Yeah, they were responsible for over 180 accusations of witchcraft. And it was mostly women. There were a few men apparently, but the women who tended to survive were the ones that they accused that actually had, like you said, most of the women they accused were widows or spinsters or things like that who had no support, but there were others who actually, and I did my genealogy, and somebody from a nearby colony who was involved in this, but they weren't from Salem, her son got her off.
Cool.
And she was like a distant great aunt or something of mine. And
I'm still jealous, whatever.
Her son basically got her out. But she had a family, she had kids, and they worked hard to get her out and support her and say she's obviously not a witch. But when you're an old widow who has nobody left.
Yeah, so maybe you're sad, maybe you're quiet, maybe you don't like to involve yourself in town activities. Well, of course you're a witch. Why would you live here then?
Yeah, if you don't have a support group for people to say, no, she's an upstanding woman, she would never do this. Right. Especially if a man says it. Like if your husband says, no, she would never. Yeah,
then there's a much larger chance that people are going to believe you.
Yeah.
I think the Salem Witch Trials are like very sad. Like it's
yes,
so
absolutely.
Upsetting. If you are interested in learning about the Salem Witch Trials and want a sort of entertaining way to do it, the movie The Crucible does, I think, a fair job. I don't think it's super historically accurate, but it does a fair job of like setting the scene, I think.
Yeah.
It's clearly not that accurate, and they're much older in The Crucible, but I think it does a good job of setting the scene. It kind of shows you the ridiculousness of the whole thing. And in that movie, one of the girls is lying. Like, clearly we know that they're lying, and we know that the main character is lying.
Yeah.
So you can kind of see...
Well, they actually... So I love to read about speculations for why these things might have happened. So some have speculated that there were natural causes for these girls to have fits and see things, like fungus from rye that could create hallucinations and fits.
Yeah, and then they would, like, you would think, it's the same thing that's psilocybin.
Yeah.
It's the same thing that's
the
in
mushrooms.
I don't remember that word, but yeah, you would think that was real. I'm pretty sure.
The timing and the nature of the fits suggests that the girls were faking it, but there is speculation maybe there was like a root cause. The reasons for faking it are kind of unclear. It could have been mass hysteria, or for attention.
Yeah. Well, you can worry yourself ill.
That's true.
Or if you start believing something, I think this happens a lot with like people that want to be pregnant so badly can start,
and
to
then they
mimic
have like a
the
false
symptoms.
pregnancy. Yeah.
So like that, you can if you really believe something. So like if something was happening to you, and you were like, no, don't you feel it or whatever. Maybe for the first couple days, it would be like no, but then it would be like.
I think that's what happened to Queen Mary
Yeah.
of England, is she thought she was pregnant so bad that she had a false pregnancy, but no baby was born.
Yes, you can. You could convince because your memories play tricks on you anyway. You can convince yourself that there is something wrong.
Yeah.
So maybe the first couple of girls were faking, but then the others, we all know I'm quite the hypochondriac. So
That's
if
true.
you were like, something is like stabbing me, eventually I would probably think there was something stabbing,
Yeah.
if you hear it and you see it so much and you're just like, oh no, like, is that a pinch mark on my hand? I can work myself up into a frenzy, so I wasn't like that as a child though. So I don't know, like maybe some of that was like they saw other people doing it, just convinced themselves like something's wrong.
Yeah.
Because for myself, like I would do that in a heartbeat.
So by the end of the Salem Witch Trials, over 200 people had been accused of witchcraft. 30 were found guilty out of 200. 19 were hanged. 1 was pressed to death because they wouldn't admit they were a witch.
That was the man, wasn't it?
I think so.
Yeah.
And 5 died in jail. And I feel like this is kind of when the fervor died down after the Salem Witch Trials.
Yeah, like it stopped.
I think people saw the madness that happened.
Who wants to be a part of something like that?
Yeah.
That's insanity. Like, that's, I guess, almost like spectacle court cases today. It's sort of like that when people are, like, what they say, like, Ted Bundy, like, leaped at someone in a courtroom. Just like, you don't want to be part of a spectacle, especially, like, those lawyers and everything, like, even in 1692, like, it's a profession. You don't want to ruin your credibility by that's what you're defending. Like, 9-year-old girl throwing herself on the ground, swearing that, like, pins are stabbing her and there's, like, nothing there.
Yeah.
Like, I would think you would ruin your credibility.
I think it got so out of hand that people realized how hysterical this all seemed.
Yeah, and it was absolute hysterics. Like, I couldn't imagine. And could you imagine, like, just being a person that happened to be passing through there and that's what you're dealing with? No one would want to come to your town anymore.
No, absolutely not.
And if no one comes to your town and people start to move away, the town dies.
Right.
So, in a way, self-preservation would be the end of mass hysteria like that.
Yeah, I think it just became such a fever pitch of accusations that after that people were like, well, we don't want to do that again.
No, I couldn't. Oh, that would be god-awful.
Because there were a few little pockets, maybe individual cases of being accused of witchcraft after that, but that was really the end of the hysterical witch hunts.
Yeah, and, like, we're thinking this is long before the colonies become united or anything else. So this is just, like, they're still, like, scrounging by in, like, half wilderness. You don't really have time for this. There's so many other things that they should have been concerned about, I would think. I do love the idea that it was, like, magic mushroom stuff.
Yeah.
That I can't, it's like, just, I don't know how to pronounce that word. But I love that, like, that's my favorite theory, that they were all just mad hallucinating.
Yeah.
And everybody was like, well, I guess it's witches.
So I think that kind of wraps it up for our normal podcast listeners.
Yes, I would say it does. If you are subscribed to the Patreon, we will have an extended version of this where we talk about the Bell Witch.
We also will talk about a couple of other cases that happened in between all of these, and the last case of a witchcraft accusation in the U.S.
Yeah, so if you're just a normal listener, thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you later. And if you listen on the Patreon, well, we're not going anywhere.
Bye, guys.
Bye.